Hey, if you're a leader and you're looking for a mentor and you're not really sure what you should search for in a guy or a gal to lead you, well, you have a chance to learn from one of my mentors. Larry Moores was my boss in Somalia. He was a leader, but he was also a guy that I tried to model my life after. And I am honored to introduce you to one of my mentors, Larry Moores, on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life. You're listening to Unbeatable with Jeff Struecker.
Hey, Larry, I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to having an episode with my former boss and a guy that I really, really look up to. Thanks for joining me on Unbeatable.
Well, thanks for having me. When I saw your podcast kicking off, I said I better get on now while I can before he has too many good leaders on there, and then I don't make the cut anymore. So
yeah, well, you would always make the cut with me. Hey, you want to talk a little bit about playing hockey in school before you joined the military, and then swinging the golf clubs a little bit during and after the military? Sure.
Again, I grew up as a kid in central Connecticut. Played a lot of sports as a kid, and we try and have that same identity with our children today. I've always thought that team sports is good at that. Yeah. That a good part of that foundation and growing into future positions. So we played baseball, hockey, soccer as kids, trying to find one that we liked and we thrived in. Hockey seemed to stick with my brother and I, and then I have an ugly golf swing, sort of like a hockey swing. So it transitioned pretty good. So
you are the original Happy Gilmore is what you're telling me. You're the original Happy Gilmore.
Happy, yeah. Never fought with Bob Barker, though,
yeah.
So we'll have to get that on the
That's
on
right.
the resume somehow. So.
Well, obviously, for people that don't know us, you and I have a long past together, so we're not really getting to know each other for the first time. I just want people to understand a little bit about your background. Tell everybody what prompted you to join the military.
I come from a long family of military service. My dad, I was born into the Air Force. My dad was serving in Oklahoma. So I was born as an Air Force brat. Every male in our family served at least one tour in the military, all the way back to World War I. So wow. It is a neat family history. Yeah. My brother was a cadet at West Point when I was in high school, and I played a lot of hockey in school and sports, and probably should have studied a little more instead of skating more. But I talked to my brother. He was home on one of his trips, weekends off from the academy, and he gave me some great advice as a young kid. He said, if you're going to go into the military, go into a good unit, and then you'll build a solid foundation. So you'll have that foundation. If you decide to get out and go to college, you'll be better because of it. And if you decide to stay in, then you've got a good foundation. So I found myself with an enlistment, directly to the 1st Ranger Battalion in 1982. And it was just an amazing entry, an amazing time, and a perfect start to what ended up being a career in and out of the Rangers.
Yeah. And not only did you enlist and go straight to the Ranger Regiment, but you went to the 1st Ranger Battalion and were in the unit preparing for and eventually taking part in the invasion of Grenada. For a lot of the listeners, they don't know what Operation Urgent Fury is. So can you give everybody like a short description of what prompted the U.S. to send warriors to Grenada, but also your role there?
Sure. The invasion of Grenada was the fall of 1983. So September, October, it started to spin up some. There was a medical school campus on the island, not far from the runway. And the dictator that lived there had taken over, and there was some thought that the medical students would be at risk. So the mission was put together for an airfield seizure and then subsequent removal of all the American citizens off the island. So it was a fairly quick operation back then, but one of the first missions after Desert One, the Iran mission. So trying to build on continued successes for the special operations and integrating aircraft, Navy vessels, different types. I was a young rifleman at the time. It was an amazing experience and an opportunity to see what right looks like. So I followed those leaders because they always set such a good example. The late Bill Aceves was my first sergeant, just amazing. And General Barno, retired General Barno was our company commander. So again, two role models, along with the myriad of corporals and sergeants and staff sergeants in the platoons that really trained you and taught you everything you needed to know to be successful.
Yeah. Larry, you know this, but for the listeners, I joined the Army not long after you, a few years after you, and kind of followed the same path, enlisted straight to the Ranger Regiment. And I had the privilege of showing up to the Ranger Regiment with a handful of guys that had taken part in the invasion of Grenada. And those were the guys that I really looked up to. I was hugely influenced by the Rangers that took part in that operation, and they had a big influence on me. And like you, I had some of those guys next to me. The first time I went to combat in the invasion of Panama, there was some Grenada Rangers right next to me, kind of walking me through my first firefight and helping me to know how to respond and what to expect. And I wouldn't be the guy that I am today without some of those early mentors in my life.
They were a great bunch to work with. Again, those were my first interactions with them. But if you go back a few years to Grenada and the Desert One, but some of our senior NCOs and some of the officers at the time were Vietnam veterans
guys,
as well.
Right? Yeah,
they were the ones that we looked up to. So it was a very similar sequence of events. You followed those guys who had been there before because they had an understanding of how they would react when the bullets were going the opposite direction.
One of the privileges about being a warrior in combat is having those guys like you did, Vietnam vets that could kind of be next to you in the invasion of Grenada. I had Grenada vets that were next to me in the invasion of Panama. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but that when you and I were preparing to go to Somalia, virtually everyone in that unit didn't have combat experience. So I grabbed my squad, pulled them in close, and did for them what those Grenada vets did for me, what those Vietnam vets did for you. And I think that tradition has carried on for generations in the U.S. military.
I think there was some acceptance too. You did a great thing there, pulling the young Rangers in to help them through that time frame, obviously where there was a lot of anxiety and unknowns. But I think your day-to-day actions also played a role in developing them. They already knew you'd been there before, and they knew to follow you for the right reasons. I talked to some folks when I came back to B Company 3rd Battalion as a young lieutenant, as a second lieutenant. There was some acceptance of me into the platoon because I was prior enlisted, because I had been on a deployment before. So I never tried to overvalue that. I tried to be, the best platoon leader I could, but I knew people looked at it like, hey, Lieutenant Moores has deployed. He's been here before. He stood in my shoes, and there was value when I was leading because of that.
Yeah, I had a lot of bosses that I looked up to, but I would place you up at the top, and for a couple of reasons. So I wanted to fast forward through this part, and I'm glad you just mentioned it. You didn't stay as an enlisted guy in 1st Ranger Battalion. There was a point where you decided to transition, go through officer candidate school, become a lieutenant, and eventually you showed up as my boss in 3rd Ranger Battalion as my platoon leader. But very briefly, what prompted you to transition from enlisted to becoming an officer?
I had always had an interest in getting a commission. My brother was a West Point graduate, as I had said earlier. When I was a young E4 in the 1st Ranger Battalion, we had come back from Grenada. I had gone to Ranger School, the first class after we redeployed.
Wow!
And I had applied to the prep school to go to West Point. My brother was a senior at the academy at the time, so we were able to get my packet through the channels at West Point for a review before it was submitted. And then I received the standard, sorry, we're not going to accept you letter in the mail. So all that work was for naught, I guess. But I always had that desire, and it was timing. I really enjoyed being a Ranger NCO, and I was able to go back to 1st Battalion for a second tour. And it's a tougher transition than people think.
It is.
I had wanted to go. I was told, hey, you're not ready. So I continued to work as an NCO, enjoyed my time, and then finally was able to get into officer candidate school right before the 10-year cutoff, and was able to get back to the Rangers fairly quickly.
Yeah. You already know this, but for the listener, there is something qualitatively different about a leader, especially a commissioned officer who has served as an enlisted person before. And it's noticeable in the way that they lead. So when you showed up, Larry, to the platoon and took over as our platoon leader and our boss, all of us kind of looked to you because of your enlisted background and your experience in Grenada. We automatically gave you respect. But you know this, Larry, that respect only takes you so far. The history and the experiences from the past, they only take you so far. From there's a point where you're going to have to start to prove and continue to prove that you're worthy to lead those guys. And you did that exceptionally well.
I appreciate that. And again, I think coming in to that platoon, it was made easy because of the good NCOs and the team that we had together. But it also allowed me to focus on being a good lieutenant. I didn't have to worry about what was going on in the platoon because I knew what Specialist Jones was supposed to be doing because I'd already been there. I knew what the squad leaders, I knew the roles and responsibilities, so I just had to focus on being a good lieutenant and leading well. And I tried my best to do that and not get in other people's way.
Well, so now describe for the listener the timing between you showing up to this platoon in 3rd Ranger Battalion and this platoon getting deployed to Somalia, because it was a pretty short flash to bang for you, right?
It was fairly quick. I showed up, I guess, February, March of 93, went to Korea for Team Spirit. We had a series of deployments back to back overseas, got back from Thailand in the summer. And then we're on another mission fairly quickly after that. Again, I understood a lot of the Ranger work and the JRXs and the stuff that we were doing. But it was fairly quick from that initial jump into Korea to a train up for a real world mission while we were at Fort Bragg.
Yeah. So my wife still believes that all of this was bogus and it was just designed to hide the fact that we were getting ready to deploy to combat. But we went as a battalion to do a training exercise in Texas, and we're there for quite some time before getting called out of Texas to go fly to the East Coast and put this team together with very little notice. And at this point, you have integrated into the unit well, just because of how intense the training cycle is. But you're still, a relatively new platoon leader, right?
That's correct. Yeah, about 6 months. So it was a fast turn, and we did a lot of training back then. So it was one training exercise after one deployment. So it was a pretty constant turn. It was easy to transition in because of how busy you stayed.
There are a couple of moments with you as my boss that stick out in my mind. There's one or two of them in training where you really, really coached me and led me well. But there's a moment that sticks out to me as we were preparing to go to Somalia. And we talked about this just briefly. I really want people to hear this because I think almost everybody finds themselves in this really uncomfortable situation where we as a unit are preparing to go to Somalia, and there's some decisions that are being made. And you as our boss have to kind of confront, if not confront, then disagree with our commander, with your commander. And I watched you do that. I watched you do that from a distance, and I was just blown away by what you did for us. So can you, in some delicate terms, just describe what it was like to have to confront your commander and kind of put your job on the line, put your rank on the line, and maybe even fall on your sword a little bit for your troops?
Well, I think wholeheartedly that taking care of troops is our number one mission, no matter what role we're in. So I was a lieutenant at the time, and my responsibility was everybody in third platoon. And I felt with the transition of missions and everything that was going on during that initial train up, that we were better suited for specific missions. And I wanted to make sure that was known by, the leaders that were making that decision. So I voiced my opinion, and at some point you voice your opinion, you let it be known, and then you go forth and execute.
Yeah.
And I think our team, did admirably well, given the circumstances. And I've always said, Rangers are very flexible based on the training foundation that they have and their ability to move from one mission set to another because of their fundamentals and that foundation that's built with repetition over and over and over again.
Yeah, as I watched you and listened to you stand up and kind of defend your troops and argue against your boss, I developed the greatest respect for you. Now, I would have followed you had that not happened, but when I watched you stand up for us, that was the moment that I decided whatever he needs from me, whatever he asks of my squad, he's got it, because I know this man cares enough for us that he's willing to stand up and put it all on the line for us.
I think there's a lot of value in the leadership role and the mentorship role with the elements that you work with, but part of my responsibility in that role also is as a buffer between my people and the decision makers, and I have to stand up, and I have to push back sometimes, and I have to withhold sometimes, just so I am the one in the middle who's somewhat of a lightning bolt that does what's right for the unit, whether it has a direct impact on you guys or not.
Yeah. I really hope that the person that's driving right now, listening to this episode, or who's watching it, that mid-level manager who's in this really uncomfortable situation and they feel like, I need to say something to my boss, but by saying something to my boss, I'm putting a lot on the line. In fact, I might get fired if I do this poorly, or if my boss just reacts wrong. And I'm hoping they're listening to you and they're hearing. I can't promise you how things are going to turn out, but I can promise you that the people that you're standing up for, they're going to notice, and it will make a huge difference. Larry, I will for the rest of my life, respect you for the fact that you stood up for us when you probably didn't want to, and you didn't have to, but you did for us anyway.
I appreciate that. And I did have to, that was my role. So
yeah,
it's a little bit different from different angles. I was told a couple different times during that deployment that I was going to be put on a resupply aircraft back to the U.S.
Yeah, you're going to get sent back to the States.
I held my ground and stayed the whole tour. So.
Well, I when I speak to audiences, there are one or two names that I always mention, and yours is one of them. And we said this just before the episode started. This is the moment for me that you went from being my boss and my leader to being a mentor and a guy that I really, really wanted to emulate. Just watching you, and again, not even really saying anything to your face about it, but just watching you from a distance and respecting highly who you are and what you stood for, you became a mentor to me that I spent a lot of time trying to live up to that kind of reputation that you set for me.
I think it goes back to our earlier discussion, Jeff. The similar role that I sat in, 10 years prior in Grenada, and the mentors, the ones that meant so much and that brought me back home. I always had a feeling that if I could put the same time and energy into mentoring and leading that they did for me, if I could get through to 80-85%, because I knew I couldn't match them, they were so good. Then I was getting the exact results I needed. And again, it's comforting to know that I always tried to lead from the front. I tried to do the right thing. I tried to have that calm personality where it wasn't Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I always thought you knew what you were getting, because I tried to be pretty approachable and calm even when things were going wrong.
Well, I want to talk about the Humvee right next to me on the streets, on National Street in Somalia in just a second, and the two unflappable leaders. And I use that term intentionally. But before we do that, this is the perfect moment to talk about a mentor, because this is the first time that I really saw what I was looking for in a mentor when I watched you in the train up as we got ready to go to Somalia. And I think there are some guys and gals out there that are listening that are saying, I need a mentor, but I don't even know where to start. So I do this high five segment. We talked about this ahead of time, and I would love for us to just bounce back and forth on qualities, or what are the things that you would say you look for in a mentor, especially for that guy or gal that's listening that's saying, all right, I know I need one, but I don't have one. I don't know what to look for. So what would you look for in a mentor, or what do you look for in a mentor, Larry?
I think one of the first things is someone who's approachable, someone who you have some common interests with, that whether it's a unit, whether it's work, whether it's uh, additional duty that you have, where you can link and share common interests and goals, and not always just specific to your work grind, so to speak. So there's value there, I think, where when they see you outside of the environment where your desk is located, and see the whole person.
Yeah, I love the word approachable. I was going to use the word that they were humble, and they had the attitude where they were willing to listen as much as they're going to talk. Like, I want a mentor that's going to give me advice, but I need a mentor that's willing to listen honestly to what's going on, so that the advice that they give me is the advice that I really need to hear, not just what they want to say. And that comes from being approachable. One of the things I think that's at the top of my list is I need a mentor that has experience. And this is why you became that mentor to me. You were a guy who had gone down a road that I hadn't gone down before. And when I wanted to become a mentor, I realized, all right, I've gone down a road. I'm going to help somebody else go down that road. And at the top of my list is I need a mentor that's got not just experience, but the kind of experience that I'm looking for, the kind of wisdom from that experience that I want to learn from. What about you? What else would you look for?
I think another one that's pretty high is that there's an interest in me from that mentor. And I think you can see that. You don't want to try and approach a mentor that's somewhat unapproachable, like I mentioned. So I like this person, I like what he stands for, and I like the experience that he has. But if I can't force myself on him so he could be my mentor,
right.
if that makes sense.
That's right.
There has to be a mentor-mentee relationship where there's an interest from both parties to make that successful.
Yeah. As you're driving along listening to this episode, Larry and our lists are almost exactly the same, because that was on my list of qualities that I'm looking for in a mentor. And in this high five list of mentor qualities, I want to put up the character of the individual. By this, I mean their integrity and their trustworthiness. Just because you have a couple of experiences and they went your way doesn't mean you're the kind of guy or gal I want to model my life after. And a mentor to me is somebody that I really wanted to model my life after. And for me, character and experience are both non-negotiables. So anything else on your list?
I think, lastly, I'd have to go with the genuine interest. So someone who really has that heartfelt, and you can tell, some people will say, hey, we've had this relationship for a while, and give me a call if you need something. There's people who say that, and there's people who really mean that.
Right.
So I think that genuine part really means a lot. And there are certain people, and you know them very well, that if you needed something this afternoon and you made a phone call, that they would answer, and they would do whatever they could to make that happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, our lists are almost totally identical. I'm looking for a leader that has that genuine interest in me, and they care enough about me. I'm going to use this term carefully, that they're willing to give me some feedback, even some painful feedback when I need to hear it. I just want you to give me the feedback in a way that I can receive it, and don't just, blow me up because of it, but but say the hard things that I need to hear, just say it in a way that I can hear it and learn from it and grow from it, instead of just, telling me you're stupid and you need to figure this one out. So, I think you and I,
and I think the Rangers do that well in that environment that we grew up in. The AARs and the feedback you got from leadership. Sometimes it was kind of brutally honest, but it got you focused on what you needed to change to make yourself better.
Yeah. So in this mentoring high five segment, the only reason I'm doing this is because for the listener, I'm having the honor, one of the privileges of hosting a podcast is to be able to talk to some of my heroes. And Larry, you're not just a mentor to me, but you're a hero. And it's the way that you reacted and led when the bullets were flying in Somalia. I watched you. I listened to you. I followed you because of the way that you led. And you earned my respect in the tough training that we did and the hard decisions to stand up for your men before we got to Somalia. But when the bullets are flying, man, I watched you, and I had the greatest respect for the two unflappable leaders in that Humvee in front of me in the city streets on National Street most of the night in Somalia. So I'm going to let you tell this part of the story. You want to describe kind of how your platoon ended up in Somalia on Humvees. I could spend lots of time talking about why we were on Humvees instead of helicopters. We won't go there, but on Humvees on the city streets, and your role on October 3rd and 4th in Black Hawk Down.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned how we ended up in the Humvees. So that's a fun dynamic.
Yep.
We were not the Humvee element. We were the jump clearing team. So we spent very little time with Humvees, and that's back to some of those decisions that were happening at Fort Bragg and those uncomfortable back and forth. We adapted well and we did well when it counted. So the train up, everything with the deployments, our ability to be successful. We brought in some folks from weapons platoon to work with our Mark 19s and 50 cals who did tremendous work. But I think that was built on the time frame leading up to the 3rd and 4th of October, our 5-6 weeks before that, where we were able to train hard. We were able to set up ranges. We were able to make our Rangers better because we tested them in all kinds of different environments. We went to ranges all the time. We used demo charges. We tested different capabilities, and we spent a lot of time on the streets trying to figure out where different parts of the city were more or less receptive to who we were and why we were there. So, and that paid big dividends as different missions started to be put upon us in different parts of the city.
Yeah. You were on another mission doing business on the other side of town when the call went down to launch the assault force to go take down the building. So you didn't get a chance to roll out with your platoon immediately. I don't think you and I've had a chance to have this conversation. I sit back and I think that must have been maddening for you, hearing that the first few minutes of that fight on the radio and not being there with them. Describe a little bit about the timing between the assault force launching onto the target and you linking up and heading back out in the city streets.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. It was probably the longest 30 minutes I spent down there. Again, not being able to have an impact where I was supposed to be having an impact. But completely understood our roles and missions as part of the task force as well. Every day, and you remember it well, every day we had a mission somewhere in the city, and whether it was a resupply escort or a VIP escort or just environmentals in the city. So there was some of our vehicles were rolling on a constant basis. And that day, because it was my turn, that's where I was. So we were on our way back to the airfield. If it was my decision to make, I would have held everything for 30 minutes because now I can look into the crystal ball and understand that 30 minutes wouldn't have made a huge difference. But we didn't. I was in the JOC immediately. I was working with the folks at the unit, with General Garrison's team, and saw some of the initial events unfold through some of the live feed footage. had somewhat of a better understanding, I think, because I saw some of those initial movements unfold as you were on your way back to the airfield and when we linked up. So it all happened fairly quickly. But I think that timing of it and getting to see and getting some guidance from senior leadership that were very poignant in how I could get inserted quickly into the fight and help, because it was evident early on that day that it was a different mission and that there was going to be a different outcome. It did change quickly. And then because of our knowledge of the city and our ability to maneuver, we were able to get back out there fairly quickly and try and get to those two crash sites.
So there's a moment when I come back to the base, I'm dropping off Todd Blackburn, who's wounded, and Dominic Pilla, who's dead. And you walk up to me and kind of give me the mission to do the navigation and to take this patrol out to the Durant crash site. And you're going out there with us because you weren't, you were across town when we launched to go out on the assault on the target the first few minutes. And I wanted you to know that it sat different with me knowing that you were going to be in those Humvees right beside me. In fact, a time or two in the Humvees scraping up against me or bouncing off of the walls next to me, but it made the world of difference knowing that you, my boss, who I respected and trusted, was going to be right next to me in the city streets instead of across town. That made a big impact on me, and I think a lot of other Rangers from your platoon.
And that initial launch when we went to Durant's crash site as well, those were routes that we had already taken based on previous missions. So we had been there. We ran into some obstacles, some roadblocks. The dynamics had obviously changed because they knew, where those aircraft had gone in and where they needed to get to. So they did everything they could to keep us from getting from point A to point B when we felt it was a pretty simple movement to get up there.
There were two voices on the radio net all night long. You stayed out there until 9 o'clock the next morning. In fact, for the listener, fun fact, Larry's Humvee and mine, I think, were the last two Humvees to actually leave the city and make it back to the Pakistani soccer stadium sometime after everybody else made it back there because we were loaded down with people. But there were two voices over the radio that were calm, that were under control, and that I think brought a sense of stability to the rest of the guys that were freaking out and, overwhelmed by hundreds, if not thousands of bad guys right around us. And that was you and the other person in the Humvee right next to you, Major Craig Nixon. And those two voices had a big impact on me. And I tried to remain calm and lead like I was learning from and listening to you during that fight. So I want to just compliment you on your ability to stay calm in the midst of chaos for 18 hours.
Again, that's one of those roles where people want guidance, but they don't want back and forth guidance. And I thought, our training up to that point had done a very good job of getting it to us. It's obviously a lot more heightened, but those kind of comments from you, from some of the peers, from some of the leadership in the JOC were very comforting to know that, hey, we trained hard, we worked hard, but we were effective because of our systems and our abilities in place. So that was good to know. It was a huge team effort, and knowing that the guidance from higher, the guidance going down to our subordinate leadership was on that same vein, and people understood what the mission was.
Yeah. So I'm sure everyone has figured out at least one of the two unflappable leaders in the Humvee next to me in Somalia was you. And if you missed it, that other leader was Major Craig Nixon. And watching you and him that night, two of you in the same Humvee, commanding and controlling and staying calm in the midst of chaos. I just used a lot of words that start with C. But that had a big impact on me. So can we talk for just a second about Craig Nixon and how incredible he led, just thrown into this thing at the last second in, on those city streets for a few minutes?
Yes. Again, Craig was one of those, a brand new major. I believe he got promoted while we were down there. So he was, his new rank really put it to test. But having him there and being able to communicate with the C2 bird above us with the jock, to relay that, where I could focus on leading the platoon and he could do the senior leadership work. I thought it was a good team, and we were able to, that fight once we left the Newport facility was a long, laborious fight.
Yeah.
From the minute we rolled out of the gate. So having that leadership and connectivity to help us with the fire support, with our movement, with everything that we needed at that point was very effective, and made our jobs easier in a very difficult situation.
Yeah. There's a couple of guys that I would not have been able to lead well through the big fight in Somalia if it wasn't for them. And two of those guys were right next to me, you and Craig Nixon, the two unflappable leaders in that Humvee next to me. And I just want to, again, say, I watched you, I listened to you, I learned from you. And on the spot, I tried to emulate you or follow the kind of leader that you were with my men in the Humvees right next to you. And if it wasn't for you, I think a lot of people would have lost control. There would have been a lot more panic and a lot of people losing control during that fight.
Yeah, the young kids really did amazing.
They did.
This is the first deployment for a lot of these young Rangers, and again that training foundation and their leaders above them really set a tone. They gave them the guidance they needed. They understood what the mission was to get to those crash sites. But the young Terry Butlers, the 18 years old, these are instances that 18-year-olds shouldn't have to go through. But they did amazing, and they followed the guidance that they got. And we're talking today because of all those kids who pulled more than their share.
Yep, absolutely. You stuck around the Army for a long time after Somalia. You had a big, you continue to make a big impact all the way into the global war on terrorism. Can we talk for just a couple of minutes about the latter half of your career and how things ended up, or where you kind of ended your career?
Sure. Again, I really enjoyed the time with the Rangers. I went on to Fort Bragg, and we were there again together. We had this common occurrence of crossing paths on numerous occasions.
Yep.
I commanded in the 82nd, and then got an amazing opportunity to go over to JSOC in 2000 at the end of the year. General Kearney, who was our commander in 3rd Battalion after we got back from Somalia, who I respect to the utmost. He called me one day and asked me to come over and interview to be the aide and the exec to the CG for the Joint Special Operations Command. And it really was an amazing opportunity. He told me, he said, I never wanted to be an aide when I was your rank, but if I had to be one, I'd want to be one for this guy. So I went over and interviewed. It really was a whirlwind. I interviewed on a Thursday. I guess the boss was looking for someone that was a little older and experienced. So I had those two things going for me.
Yeah.
And then I believe I told him something about being super organized, and I had a lot of systems I could put in place. So I had to figure those out real fast. So I interviewed on Thursday, got hired on a Friday, and like the following week I left for Europe on a 10-day trip. And it was just a whirlwind after that, but it was really a remarkable experience. And then fast forward to another JRX that summer of 2001, and we were in Europe again, and 9/11 happened, and being a captain, young major, being a fly on the wall with the JSOC command team, being able to be in all the meetings, all the briefings in the Pentagon and in Washington, D.C., and with all the units before we deployed. It really was a tremendous time to be there. So I always talk about that sequence, and we talked about Grenada earlier and then Somalia. Yeah. But I remember sitting at a table in Oman. It was shortly after we arrived, before the first missions were getting conducted. And three of the former platoon leaders from a B company were all sitting at the same table as captains and majors in different roles, but the same people, the same units. It was really powerful to see that. And we talked about that mentorship and leadership, and that community does it as well as anybody.
Yeah. You led me because after September 11th, I'm on Fort Bragg at the same time that you are. I'm a chaplain in the 82nd, and the war is just getting ready to get started. And you and I crossed paths, and you kind of gave me some thoughts and some advice and a way to consider what this war is going to look like and how much different it will be than the ones before it. And I needed to hear that from you. So you were still mentoring me years and years later.
Yeah, again, I think that's for those, like you said, for the people that are riding along this morning, the mentorship doesn't stop when you change jobs or the other person changes job.
Yeah.
The lifelong mentorship roles and responsibilities always continue on. The bonds that are built in the fights that we went through are solid, like no other. So you have that foundation that built that connectivity. Yeah. So I think more than, and again, I'm not saying that the mentorship that works in an office environment isn't successful, but ours is solidified through shared hardships. Yeah. And I think the tougher the hardships, the tighter the bond that we build.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the perfect segue. After you retired from the Army, you continued to serve, you continued to lead and to mentor others as the executive director of the Three Rangers Foundation, which is, by the way, one of my favorite charities and foundations to support. So describe the Three Rangers Foundation to people that have never heard the name before.
Sure. The Three Rangers Foundation is a fairly new nonprofit that directly supports the 75th Ranger Regiment. So it works a few different programs. The mentor transition program is one of the big ones, where the former Rangers link directly with Rangers that are separating and leaving the military to help them with that transition. So that's a big one. They have a Gold Star program. And then a couple of other programs with the Ranger for Life. So very successful and growing. Sergeant Major Mike Hall is the new executive director and is taking it to a whole nother level with his connectivity and linkages with the regiment and the community and the business world. So it's fun to see all the positives that are growing out of it. Their annual golf tournament is in a few weeks up in the Northern Virginia area. Gaithersburg, Maryland, I believe, is the location. So again, another great event that they put on, helping with the transitioning Rangers.
Yeah, this is my number one military charity right now that I am so passionate about. And when this episode ends, by the way, for all of the listeners, don't tune out right away, because I'm going to tell you about how I'm trying to raise around $50,000 this year to give to the Three Rangers Foundation, because I believe so much in what they're doing. Larry, as we wrap up, you made a statement that really stuck with me, and it's about helping prepare yourself for adversity. It's about leading people well through adversity. And I think there are folks that are listening to this podcast and they're saying, all right, I want to be the kind of person that can lead well through adversity, but I don't know what it takes to do that. And I want you to just give people some advice on how to prepare themselves today, or to prepare their team today for the adversity that may be coming a week from now, or it may be a year from now, but it's coming. And how can you prepare today for that adversity that may be on the way?
That's a great question, and good timing. I think the biggest thing is the development blocks and how that's all put together. So the formative years, as you're going through your youth, your schooling, your initial training, those challenges that you put yourself through, again, different levels based on different responsibilities. Right. Adversity is based on the environment that you're currently in, and it changes as you get older and grow. I do some work at the school where my children go, and I talk to the the athletes and the captains of sports about adversity. And high school adversity is a little different than college adversity or first job adversity. So it's all based on where you are in that lifeline. I'm not saying that high school adversity is not difficult for people, but it usually gets a little more difficult as you go through your transitions and then later on with families and all the other dynamics that you put into that. But I think the biggest part of it is having the fundamentals and building on that formation of your leadership abilities and reading.
Yeah.
Over my shoulders is some of my preferred reading lists.
I see them. Yeah.
and I will pull those off the shelf and go through them again. If you haven't read Once an Eagle lately, it's always a great one to pull off the shelf and dig through it again, because there's so many great lessons that we can learn from reading about history, so we don't have to repeat them. But I think that's a big piece, having that foundation. And I mentioned it about the Rangers before. The Rangers are very flexible in their mission sets because of their foundation, because when they do a airfield seizure, they do on-load, off-loads. I always wondered why we had to do those all night long.
Yeah, all night long, right?
But they're good at it because they do it so much, and they do the repetition, and they're very good at shifting from one mission to another because they have a foundation. And it's the same in your life. If you put the time forth, if you listen to pick a series of podcasts that you want to grow from. So get the leadership podcast, do your reading, take some additional sessions on leadership challenges. And then the testing aspect of it too. Your physical being, you're testing yourself physically and personally and mentally. So that's all a part of that. And again, the Three Rangers team has that same mindset. Yeah. We have to make sure we're physically sound, we're mentally sound, we're fiscally sound with our finances and our responsibilities. And then you're able to reach out and be that mentor and be that leader because your foundation is solid.
I'm learning from you still, years and years later. So I just took down 3 notes, and I hope that the person that's driving, you don't have to stop driving and try to write while you're driving, but I hope those 3 lessons that you just heard from Larry are going to stick with you. If you want to be the kind of leader who can lead people well through adversity, well, you've got to be able to master the fundamentals. If your team hasn't mastered the fundamentals, things are going to fall apart when it gets tough. You have to be a leader who continues to grow. And as Larry described it, you're growing by learning and reading and continuing to stretch yourself. And then finally, you have to be the kind of guy or gal who's not afraid to do some hard stuff now, because that hard stuff now will prepare you for the even harder stuff that may be coming down the road. Larry, I've said it about 5 times during this episode, but I have been looking forward to this because you're not just a boss that I had the privilege of serving with, but you're a guy who I have learned a lot from and tried to model my life after. So thanks for taking some time out of your schedule and being with me on this episode of Unbeatable.
I really appreciate it, Jeff. I looked as much forward to this as you did, and these feelings are mutual. They were great times with great people, and your impact on the community continues to grow as well. So let's continue to stay out there. Let's stay visible and lead them the way that we were trained.
Absolutely. Hey, there you have it. All of us will face adversity, and there's a way to prepare yourself today for adversity. You just heard 3 very profound ways to prepare yourself or your team today before adversity hits. You can tell that I respect Larry Moores and think the world of this guy. And I just want to say thanks. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Unbeatable. Maybe you found this podcast for the first time. Why don't you go ahead and follow us on social media? You can find us pretty much everywhere by just searching for @UnbeatablePodcast. And if you've been listening for a while and you really like what you're hearing, why don't you rate us on your favorite podcast platform and tell everybody what you think about this podcast? And by the way, before you go, I prepared this free resource. I call it the Unbeatable Army Survival Guide. And the only thing that you got to do to get this free PDF download is just simply go to unbeatablearmy.com. Hey, it was an honor to introduce you to a leader and a guy that I respect, Larry Morris. And I can't wait to introduce you to next week's guest on Unbeatable. Tune in next week.